On October 1st, 2003, a 15-year-old student named Christopher Poole launched what would become one of the most influential websites in internet history. Working under the pseudonym Moot, Poole created 4chan.net from his bedroom in New York City, inspired by the Japanese image board Futaba channel. He had no idea that his creation would eventually birth a movement that would challenge governments, corporations, and institutions worldwide. The digital rebellion that would emerge from those early forum posts would reshape how we understand activism, privacy, and collective action in the 21st century. The story of Anonymous begins not with a grand manifesto or revolutionary declaration, but with the simple act of anonymous posting. 4chan's design philosophy centered around ephemerality and anonymity. Users could post without creating accounts. Their messages would disappear after a certain time. And the default name for all posters was simply Anonymous. This wasn't meant to be revolutionary. It was meant to be liberating in the most basic sense, allowing people to express themselves without the weight of permanent identity or social consequence. In those early days, the site's random board, known as /b/ became a breeding ground for internet culture. Users engaged in what they called raids, coordinated efforts to flood other websites, game servers, or chat rooms with traffic, causing them to crash or become unusable. These weren't sophisticated cyberattacks in the traditional sense. They were more like digital pranks, the online equivalent of teenagers making prank phone calls. The users referred to themselves collectively as Anonymous when they ventured outside 4chan, a name that carried no special meaning beyond the default posting name on their home site. The transformation from pranksters to protesters didn't happen overnight. For the first few years, Anonymous remained largely focused on internet mischief. They targeted other image boards, gaming communities, and social media platforms with varying degrees of success and sophistication. The collective had no central leadership, no formal structure, and no unified ideology beyond a vague commitment to freedom of expression and resistance to authority. Anyone could claim to be anonymous, and anyone could propose an operation. Ideas that gained traction would spread organically through the network, while those that didn't would simply fade away. The first glimpse of Anonymous's political potential came in scattered, smaller operations throughout the mid-2000s. The collective began targeting what they perceived as online censorship and corporate overreach. They went after companies that tried to shut down file-sharing sites, attacked forums that banned certain types of content, and harassed individuals who they felt were abusing their power online. These actions were still relatively small-scale and unfocused, but they established a pattern that would define Anonymous for years to come. The collective would identify what they saw as injustice, rally support through online forums, and then launch coordinated digital attacks against their targets. Everything changed on January 16, 2008, when the Church of Scientology made a decision that would transform Anonymous from internet pranksters into global activists. The church had obtained a leaked video of actor Tom Cruise discussing Scientology in enthusiastic terms, and they immediately began issuing takedown notices to websites that hosted the footage. The video had been posted on various sites, including the gossip blog Gawker, and the church's aggressive legal response struck many internet users as an example of corporate censorship at its worst. The reaction on 4chan was immediate and visceral. Users on the /b/ board began discussing the church's actions, and someone posted what would become known as a raid thread calling for action against Scientology. Within hours, the thread had exploded with activity as users shared information about the church, planned attacks on their websites, and began crafting a response that would mark Anonymous's emergence as a serious force in digital activism. On January 21, 2008, a video titled "Message to Scientology" appeared on YouTube, uploaded by a channel called Project Chanology. The video was unlike anything Anonymous had produced before. Instead of the chaotic, juvenile tone that characterized their earlier communications, this message was serious, measured, and sophisticated. A computer-generated voice spoke over dramatic music and imagery, delivering what amounted to a declaration of war against the Church of Scientology.
Hello, Scientology. We are anonymous. Over the years, we have been watching you. Your campaigns of misinformation, your suppression of dissent, your litigious nature, all of these things have caught our eye. With the leakage of your latest propaganda video into mainstream circulation, the extent of your malign influence over those who trust you, who call you leader, has been made clear to us. Anonymous has therefore decided that your organization should be destroyed. We are anonymous. We are legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.
The video went on to outline Anonymous's grievances against Scientology, including allegations of human rights abuses, financial fraud, and systematic harassment of critics. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, the video had been viewed millions of times, shared across social media platforms, and translated into dozens of languages. The Church of Scientology's websites came under sustained distributed denial of service, DDoS attacks. Their phone lines were jammed with prank calls, and their physical locations were subjected to black fax attacks designed to waste paper and ink. More significantly, the operation attracted support from far beyond 4chan's usual user base, drawing in activists, journalists, and ordinary internet users who had no connection to the site's culture but were moved by the message. The success of the initial online attacks led to something unprecedented in Anonymous's history: a call for real-world protests. On February 10, 2008, Anonymous members organized demonstrations outside Scientology facilities in cities around the world. The protests were notable not just for their scale — hundreds of people participated in dozens of cities — but for their method. Protesters wore Guy Fawkes masks, sunglasses, and other disguises to protect their identities, establishing a visual symbol that would become synonymous with Anonymous for years to come. The Guy Fawkes masks were particularly significant. The masks had gained cultural prominence through the 2005 film V for Vendetta, in which the protagonist wears one while fighting against an oppressive government. The mask's association with rebellion and anonymity made it a perfect symbol for the collective, and it quickly became their most recognizable trademark. Media outlets around the world ran photographs of the masked protesters, inadvertently helping to spread Anonymous's message and recruit new members. The February 10th protests were largely peaceful, but they were also highly effective. The demonstrators distributed flyers detailing their allegations against Scientology, held signs with messages like "Religion is free" and "Scientology is not," and engaged with passersby who were curious about their cause. The protests generated significant media coverage, much of it sympathetic to Anonymous's message. For the first time, the collective had successfully transitioned from online activism to real-world action, demonstrating that their influence extended far beyond the digital realm. The Church of Scientology's response to Project Chanology was swift and aggressive. Church spokeswoman Karen Poole issued a statement dismissing the protesters as a group of cyberbullies and religious bigots, while the church's legal team began preparing lawsuits against individuals they could identify. The church also launched a public relations campaign designed to discredit Anonymous and frame the protests as hate crimes against a religious minority. Despite the church's efforts, Project Chanology continued to grow. Monthly protests were organized in cities around the world, and the operation gained support from established anti-Scientology activists and organizations. The protests continued for months, with some cities seeing regular demonstrations that persisted for over a year. The sustained nature of the campaign demonstrated that Anonymous could maintain long-term operations, not just launch one-off attacks. The success of Project Chanology had profound implications for Anonymous's future development. The operation proved that the collective could organize complex, multifaceted campaigns that combined online and offline elements. It showed that Anonymous's message could resonate with mainstream audiences when properly presented. Most importantly, it demonstrated that the collective could serve as a genuine force for social change, not just internet mischief. The Scientology operation also established many of the tactical and strategic principles that would guide Anonymous in future campaigns. The collective learned the importance of clear messaging, the power of symbolic imagery, and the value of sustained pressure rather than brief, intense attacks. They discovered that real-world protests could amplify their online activities and generate media coverage that would be impossible to achieve through digital means alone. Project Chanology's success attracted attention from law enforcement agencies around the world. The FBI, which had been monitoring Anonymous since the early days of their pranks, began taking the collective more seriously as a potential threat to public order. The sustained nature of the Scientology campaign, combined with its international scope and real-world component, marked Anonymous as something more than just another hacker group. The operation also began to attract academic and journalistic attention. Researchers studying internet culture, digital activism, and social movements began examining Anonymous as a new form of collective action. The collective's unusual structure, leaderless, decentralized, and anonymous, challenged traditional theories about how social movements organize and sustain themselves. Scholars began to write papers about Anonymous, trying to understand how a group with no formal organization could coordinate such complex operations. As 2008 progressed, Anonymous began to evolve beyond its 4chan origins. The success of Project Chanology had attracted participants who had no connection to the image board culture that had given birth to the collective. These new members brought different skills, perspectives, and goals to the movement. Some were experienced activists who saw Anonymous as a powerful new tool for social change. Others were technologists who were interested in pushing the boundaries of what was possible in digital warfare. Still others were simply individuals who were drawn to the collective's message of resistance to authority and corporate power. This diversification began to create tensions within Anonymous. The original 4chan users who had founded the collective were often more interested in chaos and disruption than in serious political activism. They enjoyed the pranks and the publicity, but they weren't necessarily committed to the kind of sustained, disciplined action that effective activism required. The newer members, by contrast, were often more serious about using Anonymous as a force for social and political change. These tensions came to a head in late 2008 and early 2009. As various factions within Anonymous began to advocate for different approaches and targets, some wanted to continue focusing on what they saw as religious and corporate censorship. Others wanted to expand into broader political activism. Still, others wanted to return to the collective's roots in pranks and internet culture. The resolution of these tensions would come through action rather than debate. In 2009, Anonymous launched a series of smaller operations that tested their capabilities and refined their tactics. They targeted the Iranian government's censorship efforts during the Green Revolution, providing technical support to protesters who were trying to communicate despite government internet restrictions. They attacked websites belonging to organizations they viewed as promoting hatred or discrimination. They supported WikiLeaks, the transparency organization founded by Julian Assange, in its efforts to publish classified documents. Each of these operations taught Anonymous important lessons about digital activism. The Iran operation showed them how to provide technical support for real-world protests. The hate group attacks demonstrated the importance of choosing targets carefully to maintain public support. The WikiLeaks collaboration revealed the potential for cooperation with other organizations that shared similar goals. These experiences prepared Anonymous for what would become their most significant and controversial operation, the campaign that would come to be known as Operation Payback. The operation began in September 2010 in response to what Anonymous saw as coordinated attacks on internet freedom by copyright holders and their legal representatives. The immediate trigger for Operation Payback was a series of actions by the Motion Picture Association of America, MPAA, and the Recording Industry Association of America, RIAA, against file-sharing sites. These organizations had been pursuing an aggressive legal strategy against online piracy, obtaining court orders to shut down torrent sites and filing thousands of lawsuits against individual users. Anonymous viewed these actions as attacks on internet freedom and decided to respond with coordinated DDoS attacks against the organization's websites. The initial attacks were relatively small-scale, targeting the MPAA and RIAA websites with traffic that temporarily knocked them offline. But as the operation gained momentum, Anonymous began to expand their target list to include law firms that specialized in copyright litigation, anti-piracy organizations, and individual lawyers who had been particularly aggressive in pursuing file-sharing cases. The attacks were coordinated through a variety of online platforms, including Internet Relay, chat, IRC, channels, forums, and social media sites. Anonymous developed and distributed tools that made it easy for supporters to participate in the attacks, including software that would automatically connect users' computers to the DDoS network. The collective also created detailed target lists, attack schedules, and propaganda materials to support the operation. Operation Payback represented a significant escalation in Anonymous's capabilities and ambitions. The scale of the attacks was much larger than anything the collective had attempted before, and the sustained nature of the campaign demonstrated a level of organization and coordination that surprised many observers. The operation also marked Anonymous's full embrace of illegal tactics, crossing a line that some earlier operations had approached but never definitively crossed. The legal implications of Operation Payback were significant. DDoS attacks are illegal in most jurisdictions, and the scale of Anonymous's actions made them a priority for law enforcement agencies around the world. The FBI, working with international partners, began a coordinated investigation aimed at identifying and prosecuting Anonymous members who had participated in the attacks. The investigation faced significant challenges. Anonymous's decentralized structure and emphasis on anonymity made it difficult to identify key participants. The collective's practice of using multiple servers, proxy networks, and encryption tools to hide their activities further complicated law enforcement efforts. Most importantly, the sheer number of people who had participated in the attacks made it impossible to prosecute everyone involved. Despite these challenges, law enforcement agencies did achieve some success in their investigation. Over the following months, they arrested dozens of individuals in connection with Operation Payback, including several who were identified as key organizers of the attacks. The arrests had a chilling effect on some Anonymous participants, but they also served to radicalize others who viewed the prosecutions as proof that governments were working to suppress digital activism. The most significant development in Operation Payback came in December 2010, when WikiLeaks released a cache of classified U.S. diplomatic cables. The release, which came to be known as Cablegate, caused a major international incident and prompted a coordinated response from governments and corporations aimed at cutting off WikiLeaks' financial and technical support. Anonymous viewed the campaign against WikiLeaks as a direct attack on press freedom and decided to respond with what they called Operation Avenge Assange, named after WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. The operation targeted companies that had withdrawn support from WikiLeaks, including Amazon, which had terminated WikiLeaks' hosting account, PayPal, which had frozen WikiLeaks' account, and credit card companies like Visa and MasterCard, which had stopped processing donations to the organization. The attacks on these major corporations marked another escalation in Anonymous's campaign. The targets were much larger and more significant than anything the collective had attacked before, and the potential economic impact of the attacks was correspondingly greater. The attacks successfully disrupted the company's websites and payment processing systems, causing millions of dollars in lost revenue and demonstrating Anonymous's ability to inflict real economic damage on major corporations. The response to Operation Avenge Assange was swift and severe. Law enforcement agencies around the world launched coordinated investigations, and within months, dozens of Anonymous participants had been arrested. The high-profile nature of the targets and the economic impact of the attacks made this operation impossible to ignore, and governments began to take Anonymous much more seriously as a threat to economic and political stability. The arrests that followed Operation Avenge Assange had a profound impact on Anonymous's development. Many of the collective's most skilled and experienced members were either arrested or driven underground by the law enforcement response. The operations that had made Anonymous famous became increasingly risky to participate in, and the collective's activities began to shift toward targets and tactics that were less likely to attract government attention. At the same time, the success of Operation Avenge Assange and the broader Operation Payback campaign had established Anonymous as a major force in digital activism. The collective had demonstrated that it could organize complex, sustained operations against major corporations and government agencies. They had shown that decentralized, anonymous networks could be effective tools for political action. Most importantly, they had proven that internet-based activism could have real-world consequences. The period following Operation Payback saw Anonymous evolve in new directions. The collective began to focus more heavily on social and political causes, launching operations in support of the Arab Spring protests, the Occupy Wall Street movement, and various other activist campaigns. They also began to develop new tactics and technologies, including more sophisticated hacking techniques and better methods for maintaining operational security. The Arab Spring operations, which began in late 2010 and continued through 2011, marked another significant development in Anonymous's evolution. As protests erupted across the Middle East and North Africa, governments in the region began shutting down internet access and blocking social media sites in an effort to prevent protesters from organizing and communicating. Anonymous responded by providing technical support to protesters, including tools for circumventing government censorship and maintaining communication during internet blackouts. The collective's involvement in the Arab Spring was largely supportive rather than leading. Anonymous members provided technical expertise and infrastructure support, but they generally avoided taking credit for the protests or claiming leadership roles in the movements. This approach reflected a growing sophistication in Anonymous's understanding of their role in broader social and political movements. The technical support that Anonymous provided during the Arab Spring included a variety of tools and services. They helped protesters access blocked websites using proxy servers and virtual private networks, VPNs. They provided secure communication channels that could operate even when government authorities were monitoring normal internet traffic. They also helped protesters organize and coordinate their activities using encrypted messaging systems and other secure technologies. The Arab Spring operations also saw Anonymous begin to develop closer relationships with traditional activist organizations and journalists. The collective began working with established human rights groups, providing them with technical support and sharing information about government surveillance and censorship activities. They also began to develop relationships with journalists who were covering the protests, providing them with access to information and sources that would have been difficult to obtain through traditional means. This collaboration with mainstream organizations represented a significant shift in Anonymous's approach. The collective had historically operated independently, often in opposition to established institutions and organizations. The Arab Spring operations marked the beginning of a more collaborative approach, in which Anonymous would work with other groups while maintaining their independence and anonymity. The success of the Arab Spring operations also attracted new participants to Anonymous. Activists and technologists who had been inspired by the collective's support for the protests began to join the movement, bringing new skills and perspectives to the organization. The collective's membership became more diverse, including people from different countries, cultural backgrounds, and professional fields. This diversification brought both opportunities and challenges. The new members brought valuable skills and fresh perspectives to Anonymous, but they also introduced new disagreements about tactics, targets, and goals. The collective's loose structure, which had been a source of strength in earlier operations, began to create problems as different factions within Anonymous advocated for different approaches. These tensions became particularly apparent during Anonymous's involvement in the Occupy Wall Street movement, which began in September 2011. The movement, which focused on economic inequality and corporate power, seemed like a natural fit for Anonymous's anti-establishment message. The collective provided technical support for the protests, including communication tools and organizational infrastructure, and many Anonymous members participated in the protests themselves. However, the collaboration between Anonymous and Occupy Wall Street was not without problems. The Occupy movement's emphasis on consensus-based decision-making and horizontal organization conflicted with Anonymous's more chaotic and individualistic approach. Some Anonymous members felt that the Occupy movement was too focused on traditional protest tactics and not sufficiently committed to direct action. Some Occupy participants, meanwhile, were uncomfortable with Anonymous's history of illegal activities and their emphasis on anonymity. Despite these tensions, the collaboration between Anonymous and Occupy Wall Street was largely successful. The collective's technical support helped the movement organize and communicate more effectively, while the movement's focus on economic inequality provided Anonymous with a clear political message that resonated with mainstream audiences. The collaboration also demonstrated that Anonymous could work effectively with other organizations while maintaining their independence and unique approach. The period from 2011 to 2013 saw Anonymous continue to evolve and adapt. The collective launched operations in support of various causes, including internet freedom, press freedom, and social justice. They targeted governments that they viewed as oppressive, corporations that they saw as abusing their power, and individuals who they believed were acting against the public interest. One of the most significant operations during this period was Anonymous's campaign against the Westboro Baptist Church, a small religious group known for their extreme anti-gay protests at military funerals and other public events. The campaign, which began in 2012, included both online and offline components. Anonymous hacked the church's website, released personal information about church members, and organized counter-protests at the church's events. The Westboro Baptist Church operation was notable for several reasons. It demonstrated Anonymous's ability to generate broad public support for their actions, as the church's extreme views had made them widely unpopular. It also showed that the collective could coordinate complex operations that combined hacking, information warfare, and real-world protests. Most importantly, it proved that Anonymous could maintain sustained pressure on a target over an extended period of time. To worry? The operation also highlighted some of the ethical and legal challenges that Anonymous faced. The collective's practice of releasing personal information about their targets, known as doxing, raised questions about privacy and the potential for harassment. The hack of the church's website was clearly illegal, regardless of the unpopularity of the target. These issues would continue to challenge Anonymous as they developed their tactics and chose their targets. Throughout this period, Anonymous also began to face increased pressure from law enforcement agencies. The arrests that had followed Operation Payback were just the beginning of a sustained campaign by governments around the world to identify and prosecute Anonymous members. The FBI, working with international partners, continued to investigate the collective's activities and arrest participants in their operations. The law enforcement pressure had a significant impact on Anonymous's development. Many of the collective's most skilled and experienced members were either arrested or driven underground by the investigations. The operations that had made Anonymous famous became increasingly risky to participate in, and the collective's activities began to shift toward targets and tactics that were less likely to attract government attention. At the same time, the continued investigations provided Anonymous with new grievances and targets. The collective began to focus more heavily on what they saw as government overreach and the surveillance state. They launched operations against law enforcement agencies, intelligence services, and other government organizations that they viewed as violating civil liberties and constitutional rights. One of the most significant developments during this period was the emergence of affiliated groups and spin-offs that shared Anonymous's goals and tactics but operated independently. Groups like LulzSec, AntiSec, and various national Anonymous chapters began to emerge, each with their own focus and approach. These groups sometimes collaborated with the main Anonymous collective, but they also pursued their own operations and developed their own identities. LulzSec, which operated primarily in 2011, was particularly notable for their high-profile attacks on major corporations and government agencies. The group, whose name was a combination of lulz, internet slang for laughter, and security, launched attacks against Sony, the CIA, the US Senate, and various other targets. Their operations were characterized by a combination of technical sophistication and playful irreverence that recalled Anonymous's early days. The emergence of these affiliated groups reflected both the growth and the fragmentation of the Anonymous movement. The original collective had grown too large and diverse to maintain unity of purpose and action. Different factions within Anonymous had developed different priorities and approaches, leading to the formation of separate groups that could pursue their own agendas while maintaining loose ties to the broader movement. This fragmentation was accelerated by the continued law enforcement pressure. As investigations intensified and arrests mounted, participants in anonymous operations became increasingly concerned about security and operational safety. The loose, open structure that had been a source of strength for the collective became a liability as members worried about infiltration by law enforcement agents and informants. The security concerns led to the development of more sophisticated operational security practices within Anonymous. The collective began to use more advanced encryption and anonymization tools, implemented stricter verification procedures for new members, and developed more compartmentalized operational structures. These changes made Anonymous more secure, but they also made the collective more exclusive and harder for new members to join. The period from 2013 to 2015 saw Anonymous continue to evolve in response to changing technological and political circumstances. The collective launched operations in response to various global events, including the ongoing Syrian civil war, the rise of the Islamic State, and various government surveillance scandals. They also continued to target corporations and individuals that they viewed as acting against the public interest. One of the most significant operations during this period was Anonymous's campaign against the Islamic State, ISIS, which began in 2014. The operation, which was called OPISIS, involved both online and offline components. Anonymous hacked ISIS-affiliated websites, social media accounts, and communication channels. They also worked to identify and report ISIS supporters and sympathizers to law enforcement agencies. The OPISIS campaign was notable for several reasons. It represented a significant shift in Anonymous's typical targets, as the collective had historically focused on governments and corporations rather than terrorist organizations. It also demonstrated Anonymous's ability to adapt their tactics to new technological environments, as ISIS had made extensive use of social media and encrypted communication tools. The campaign also highlighted the growing sophistication of Anonymous's intelligence gathering capabilities. The collective had developed advanced techniques for monitoring social media activity, analyzing communication patterns, and identifying individual users across multiple platforms. These capabilities made them valuable partners for law enforcement agencies, even as those same agencies continue to investigate and prosecute Anonymous members for other activities. The collaboration between Anonymous and law enforcement agencies during the OPISIS campaign was complex and often contradictory. The collective provided valuable intelligence and technical support in the fight against ISIS, but they also continued to launch operations against government agencies and law enforcement organizations. This dual relationship reflected the complex and often contradictory nature of Anonymous's role in contemporary digital activism. The period also saw Anonymous begin to grapple with the implications of their growing influence and capabilities. The collective had evolved from a small group of internet pranksters to a global network of activists and hackers with the ability to influence major political and economic events. This power brought with it new responsibilities and new challenges. The collective began to face criticism from various quarters about their methods and targets. Some critics argued that Anonymous's illegal activities undermined legitimate activism and provided governments with excuses to crack down on internet freedom. Others contended that the collective's emphasis on anonymity and lack of accountability made them unfit to serve as arbiters of justice or agents of social change. These criticisms led to internal debates within Anonymous about the collective's future direction. Some members argued that the collective should focus more heavily on legal activities and work to build broader coalitions with mainstream organizations. Others contended that Anonymous's willingness to break laws and challenge authority was their greatest strength and should not be abandoned. The debates about Anonymous's future direction intensified during the 2016 U.S. presidential election. The collective had historically avoided taking sides in electoral politics, preferring to focus on broader issues of freedom, justice, and government accountability. However, the 2016 election, with its unprecedented focus on cybersecurity, hacking, and digital manipulation, drew Anonymous into the political fray. Different factions within Anonymous supported different approaches to the election. Some members launched operations against what they saw as election fraud and voter suppression. Others focused on exposing what they viewed as corruption, and hypocrisy among political candidates and their supporters. Still others argued that the collective should avoid electoral politics entirely and focus on their traditional targets and causes. The fragmentation of Anonymous's response to the 2016 election reflected the broader challenges facing the collective. The loose structure that had been a source of strength in earlier operations had become a source of weakness as the collective grew larger and more diverse. Different factions within Anonymous had developed different priorities and approaches, making it increasingly difficult to coordinate unified operations. The election also marked the beginning of a new phase in Anonymous's development, as the collective began to grapple with the implications of state-sponsored hacking and digital warfare. The revelation that foreign governments had engaged in sophisticated cyber operations to influence the election raised questions about the role of non-state actors like Anonymous in the digital ecosystem. The period from 2017 to 2020 saw Anonymous continue to evolve in response to changing political and technological circumstances. The collective launched operations in response to various global events, including the rise of authoritarian governments, the expansion of surveillance technologies, and various social justice movements. They also continued to adapt their tactics and technologies to new challenges and opportunities. One of the most significant developments during this period was Anonymous's involvement in the global protests that followed the death of George Floyd in May 2020. The collective provided technical support for protesters, including tools for secure communication and organizing. They also launched cyber operations against what they saw as symbols of systemic racism and police brutality. The response to the George Floyd protests marked a return to Anonymous's roots in social justice activism. The collective had historically been motivated by a desire to challenge authority and fight for the rights of marginalized people. The protests provided Anonymous with a clear cause and target that resonated with their core values and attracted broad public support. The operations that Anonymous launched in response to the protests included a variety of tactics and targets. They hacked police department websites and released information about police misconduct. They targeted white supremacist organizations and individuals who they viewed as promoting racist violence. They also provided technical support for protesters and activist organizations. The success of these operations demonstrated that Anonymous remained a significant force in digital activism, despite the challenges and changes of the previous decade. The collective had adapted their tactics and technologies to new circumstances while maintaining their commitment to social justice and resistance to authority. The period also saw Anonymous begin to grapple with the implications of their long history and evolution. The collective had been active for nearly 2 decades, making them one of the longest-running and most influential digital activist organizations in history. Their operations had influenced major political and social events, challenged powerful institutions, and inspired countless individuals to become involved in digital activism. The legacy of Anonymous's activities extended far beyond their specific operations and targets. The collective had demonstrated that decentralized, anonymous networks could be effective tools for political action and social change. They had shown that internet-based activism could have real-world consequences and influence major events. Most importantly, they had proven that ordinary individuals could challenge powerful institutions and make their voices heard in the digital age. The influence of Anonymous could be seen in the emergence of other digital activist organizations and movements. Groups like WikiLeaks, the various Occupy movements, and contemporary social justice organizations had all been influenced by Anonymous's tactics, technologies, and approaches. The collective's emphasis on anonymity, decentralization, and direct action had become standard features of digital activism. The technological innovations that Anonymous had developed or popularized also had lasting impact. The collective had helped to popularize the use of encryption, anonymization tools, and other privacy technologies. They had demonstrated the potential of distributed denial of service attacks and other forms of digital protest. They had also shown how social media and other communication technologies could be used to organize and coordinate activist activities. The legal and political implications of Anonymous's activities continued to reverberate years after their operations. The collective's campaigns had led to changes in laws and regulations governing cybersecurity, digital privacy, and online activism. They had also influenced public debates about the role of technology in politics and society. The story of Anonymous represents one of the most significant developments in 21st century activism and politics. The collective had emerged from the chaotic anonymous culture of early internet forums and evolved into a global network of activists and hackers with the ability to influence major events and challenge powerful institutions. Their operations had demonstrated the potential of digital activism while also highlighting its limitations and challenges. The transformation of Anonymous from internet pranksters to global activists reflected broader changes in technology, politics, and society. The rise of the internet and social media had created new opportunities for political action and social change, while also creating new challenges and vulnerabilities. Anonymous had been among the first to recognize and exploit these opportunities, but they had also been forced to adapt to the responses and countermeasures developed by governments and corporations. The future of Anonymous and digital activism, more broadly, remained uncertain. The collective continued to operate and launch operations, but they faced ongoing challenges from law enforcement agencies, changing technologies, and internal divisions. The rise of state-sponsored hacking and digital warfare had also created new competitors and threats in the digital ecosystem. Despite these challenges, the legacy of Anonymous seemed secure. The collective had demonstrated that ordinary individuals could challenge powerful institutions and make their voices heard in the digital age. They had shown that technology could be a force for social change and political action. Most importantly, they had proven that the principles of anonymity, decentralization, and resistance to authority could be effective tools for activism and social change. The story of Anonymous thus represents more than just the history of a particular organization or movement. It represents the story of how digital technology has transformed politics and activism in the 21st century. The collective's evolution from pranksters to protesters to global activists reflects the broader transformation of society in the digital age. The lessons of Anonymous's experience continue to resonate as new technologies and platforms emerge. The collective's emphasis on anonymity and decentralization has influenced the development of new technologies like cryptocurrency and blockchain. Their tactics and approaches have been adopted by other activist organizations and movements. Their commitment to resistance and social change continues to inspire new generations of digital activists. The Anonymous Revolution thus represents both an ending and a beginning. It marks the end of an era in which powerful institutions could operate without fear of digital challenge or scrutiny. It also marks the beginning of a new era in which ordinary individuals have unprecedented power to influence events and challenge authority through digital means. The faceless collective that emerged from the depths of internet culture had become a global voice of digital protest, proving that in the digital age, anyone could be anonymous, anyone could resist, and anyone could make a difference. The revolution had shown that the future of activism would be digital, decentralized, and unstoppable. The mask had become the message, and the message had become a movement that would continue to evolve and adapt to new challenges and opportunities in the years to come. As we look toward the future, the story of Anonymous serves as both inspiration and warning. It shows the potential of digital technology to empower ordinary individuals and challenge powerful institutions. Also, demonstrates the risks and challenges that come with this power. The collective's journey from pranksters to global activists represents the broader story of how technology has transformed society, politics, and human relationships in the digital age. Challenged, wherever powerful institutions needed to be held accountable, and wherever ordinary individuals needed to make their voices heard, the revolution would continue, faceless but never voiceless, anonymous but never powerless.